Good day, grade 10. For today, we will discuss the chapter 1 or the problem and its background of your study. Chapter 1 of your research is often called Introduction or the problem and its background. There is no fixed format, but you are encouraged to write the introduction to form a logical panel, where more general aspects are told first, and sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, proceeding into more details. Always remember you are writing for the readers who evaluating what you write. Good writing is the key to a successful research. Your writing should be clear, cohesive, and straight to the point. For chapter 1, 7 subsections are suggested. So 1.1, background of the study, it is the part of your paper where you inform the reader of the context of your study. So telling the reader briefly about the problem you are planning to investigate. Start with sentences that are simple enough to understand even for those who are not exactly experts in your topic. Begin with presenting a broad perspective of the problem or issue and gently ease the reader into problem statement. The reader needs to know why your research is worth doing and lead him or her to the next subsection, which is the statement of the problem. It is also in this part of the paper where you justify the need to conduct a research study about the topic selected by establishing the research gap. This is where you tell the reader about the research problem, which is a statement about an area you are concerned about, a condition that you feel should be addressed, a difficulty that you want to eliminate, an issue or question that exists in the literature you have read, or something troubling encountered in your practice. So the aim is to provide an understanding on why your research topic is important. You could quote or cite published journal articles to the point out the importance, preferably recent ones. And also in this section, you explain why is the research topic important or the rationale for conducting your study, why the problem matters to you, what is already known in responses to the issue or problem, why do you need to address those gaps, and lastly, you could refer to newspaper reports, research reports, journal articles, and so forth. Okay, tip. Avoid saying that the topic is interesting to you to justify your research. While it is an important element, you should go beyond interesting and focus on why there is a particular need for the research that is of interest to you. Refer to about 5 to 6 articles or authors influential in the area or field and how they fit into the topic you researched into. You are also encouraged to highlight a few 3 to 4 key terms or words or variables or constructs that form the basis of your study to prepare the readers on what to expect. It is suggested that you spend about 2 to 3 pages and quickly arrive at the objective or purpose of your study. Okay, for example, sample write-up or background of the study na pwede nyo maging guide sa paggawa nyo ng background of your study. Okay, next subsection 1.2, statement of the problem. A research problem is simple as a problem you would like to research. It answers the question, what did you study? Generally, there should be a general problem or main objective, and then this should be broken up to as many sub-problems or specific questions as necessary. In this section, you make it clear to the reader what you planned and how you have narrowed the scope of your study and tell what the study is expected to achieve. Just a few sentences will be sufficient. So, for example, the objective of this study is to cultivate eczema. in municipal waters of Estancia, Iloilo, Philippines using lantay method. Or pwede rin ganito, the main problem of this study is to cultivate eczema in municipal waters of Estancia, Iloilo, Philippines using lantay method. At the end of your objective, you should state as follows. Specifically, the study seeks to answer the following research question. Guidelines in formulating the general problem and the specific questions or subsections. So the general statement of the problem and the specific question should be formulated first before conducting a research. It is customary to state specific problems in the interrogative form. So ito yung mga WH question. Each specific problem must be clear and unequivocal. Each specific problem is researchable apart from the other question. Each specific problem must be based upon known facts and phenomena. Answers to each specific question must contribute to the development of the whole research problem or topic. Summing up the answers to all the specific question will give a complete development of the entire study. And lastly, the number of specific questions should be enough to cover the development of the whole research problem or study. Now, before writing down the specific question, determine first the different aspect of the research problem to be studied. So, the materials needed for your study, the methods you will use, availability or facilities or equipment, cost or financial requirements, benefits of your study, and lastly, the coverage or the scope of your or the limitation of your study. So, for example, the sample write-up for statement of the problem. Okay, the next subsection, 1.3 hypothesis. So, a hypothesis is simply a proposed solution to a problem or a tentative explanation for behaviors, phenomena, or events that could have happened or will happen. It can also be described as an educated guess or prediction about the outcome of your research. So, a hypothesis is meant to be tested. Formulation of the hypothesis is one of the most important aspects of any quantitative research project. While it is a single statement, the hypothesis is the key to a successful research project. So a crucial step in the scientific method, stating the hypothesis must precede any experimentation and must be done after a thorough literature review. The hypothesis should be clear and brief. A hypothesis should clearly and concisely state the expected relationship or differences between two variables and define the variable in operational or measurable terms. It should provide a good idea of what you plan to do without being too wordy. State your hypothesis using only one sentence. So, for example, extracts from aloe vera will speed up the regeneration of planaria. This single sentence can already tell anyone what you intend to explore in your investigation. Okay, next, a hypothesis should be based on past experiences or observation or on information gathered from your research. A good hypothesis is anchored on a sound and comprehensive review of related literature. As much as possible, an exhaustive survey of library readings should be done before making a hypothesis. You may have selected your topic after reading several articles in scientific journal. In this case, your hypothesis should take into account the results of the experiments or observations mentioned in that article. Next, a hypothesis must be testable. This means that your hypothesis can be proven right or wrong, depending on the outcome of your experiment. As I mentioned, if you are planning to investigate whether or not aloe vera extract speed up regeneration of planaria, you can conduct experiment to test this hypothesis. Can you think of a way to test this particular hypothesis? So perhaps you can place several planaria segments in culture media containing different amounts of aloe vera extract. Then you can compare the regeneration rates to that of planaria kept in culture medium medium soil without the extract. However, if you are planning to investigate if aloe vera extract will make planaria feel better, you cannot form a valid hypothesis on this problem. This is because you cannot perform any scientific test or experiment to assess feelings of this organism. Guidelines in formulating hypothesis. Before writing your specific hypothesis, spend more time researching about the topic you are interested in. Your independent variable and dependent variable must be included in your hypothesis. The relationship of your variables must be reflected in your hypothesis. Your hypothesis should be simple and specific as possible. Your hypothesis should be concise and comprises clear and simple language. Your hypothesis should be testable without violating ethical standards, and your hypothesis must be falsifiable. There are two general types of hypotheses based on how they are. First is the null hypothesis, also known as statistical hypothesis. So it exists when you consider that there is no relationship between the independent and dependent variables, or that there is an insufficient amount of information to claim a scientific hypothesis stated. It also refers to populations and represents the vehicle by which findings are generalized from the sample to the population. So for example, when a sample of insect A is regularly exposed to pesticide X for 1 week, 100% of the sample will die. None will survive. Another example, the mean wood production in trees adjacent to herbicide-treated fields, and that in trees adjacent to non-herbicide-treated fields are not significantly different. Another example, the mean heights of plants exposed to 0%, 10%, 20%, and 30% substance A are not significantly different. Next type is the alternative hypothesis, also known as research hypothesis. It is an alternate statement expressed to be tested in order to generate the desired output when the empirical or working hypothesis is not accepted. In an attempt to disprove a null hypothesis, you tend to seek an alternative hypothesis. It is also derived from the literature review and should suggest the outcome of the experiment. So, for example, insect A develops resistance to pesticide X. Another example, wood production in trees adjacent to herbicide-treated fields is less than wood production in trees adjacent to non-herbicide-treated fields. Another example, if the concentration of substance A is increased, then plant growth will be reduced. So an alternative hypothesis or research hypothesis can also be described as directional or non-directional. The former indicates the nature of the relationship or differences that exist, while the latter simply indicates that a relationship or differences exist or difference exists. Next is the conceptual framework or 1.4 conceptual framework. A research framework illustrates the structure or blueprint of the research plan and helps the researcher formulate relevant research questions. It is a general statement which forms the frame of reference for your inquiry or investigation. sets out the rationale which underlies why you do what you do, how you do your research. Students often are confused with theoretical framework and conceptual framework. They are both different. Conceptual framework consists of two words. Ito yung conceptual, which is the process of forming concepts and ideas. And framework, which is the structure that connects the concepts and basic ideas. The conceptual framework is constructed by the researcher and not something that exists ready-made. It acts like a map organizing and connecting the key ideas that shape your thinking. Actually, the conceptual framework is a tentative sim for the research project based on your review of literature. In your readings, you may come across two types of diagrams representing conceptual frameworks. One shows the relationship of the key concepts involved in the study. Another type, the more common one, shows the relationship of the key variables to be investigated. For example, in the diagram, lines are used to show relationships between or among the variables. Arrows are used to show the effect of the independent variables on the dependent variable. Each of these lines or arrow represent a hypothesis. Okay, another example, the effect of aloe vera extract on the rate of growth and regeneration of planaria. So ito yung conceptual framework niya. Then another study, effectiveness of culturing grouper in the fish cages using bread meal as supplemental feed. So another framework you can use is the IPO, or the Input Process Output Model. So the Input Process Output Model, or IPO, is a conceptual paradigm which indicates the inputs, required process, and the output. This approach is seated on the premise of acquiring essential information by converting inputs into outputs through the required processing steps in obtaining the result. So the IPO model is also referred to as functional model that is usually used in action research where an intervention or solution is necessary to solve the identified problem. So the input is usually the independent variable of the study. Meanwhile, the process is the intervention or solution consists of the instruments and analysis used to acquire the result. And lastly, the output is the findings or outcome of the intervention being made to solve the identified problem. So, for example, as you can see, okay, next subsection is the significance of the study, or 1.5, significance of the study, the relevance of the research to felt needs, and how the research output may be directly useful to people. After having stated the problem, the objective, and the research question, you should include a section on significance of the study in which you tell the reader the contribution of your study. So focus should be on the following. So why is your work important or study important? What are the implications of your study? How does it link to other knowledge? How does it inform policy making? What new perspective does your study bring to the field? And who would you share your findings with when the study is completed? Begin with a general contribution of your study and then proceed towards its contribution to individuals such as students, teachers, practitioners, future researchers, parents, administrator, planners, and so on. Kung sino-sino ba yung mga magiging beneficiary ng study niyo. So, kailangan yung isa-isahin yon, and then, paano sila magbe-benefit. Example, write up or significance of the study. Next, 1.6 scope and delimitation of the study. The scope specifies the coverage of your study, such as variables, population of participants, and timeline. Delimitation cites factors of your study that are not included or excluded, or those you will not deal in your study. It's a study nyo. The scope and delimitation of the study is the section in which you tell the reader the shortcomings, conditions, or influences that you could not control. You have to mention them because they may influence the results of your study. Some researchers are reluctant to write about the limitation of their study because they feel it weakens their study and points out the flaws of their study. However, it should be pointed out that most studies have limitation and it's better to indicate upfront to the reader. You stipulate the limitation but show why the results or findings of your study are still important or significant. It's important that you clearly mention the limitation of your study. So, acknowledging your study's limitation gives you the opportunity to show that you have critically thought about the research problem, data collection method, the underlying theory, relevant literature, and the findings. So, you may panelists irritating when they ask you during the defense why you did not include variable X. Why is your sample so small? Why did you use intact classes? How do you ensure there is no bias since you are the main person collecting the data? How trustworthy is your data? How did you ensure subjects were truthful in responding your questionnaire or to your questionnaire and so forth? So if your limitation section is comprehensive, the likelihood of such questions from panelists or your future panelists can be minimized. So by stating the limitation of your study, you may preempt some of the queries may have about your study. So for example, if you had argued that even though your sample was small, the in-depth data you obtained through your interviews provided thick description of the phenomenon you studied. When you state the limitation of your study, you are not listing the weaknesses of your research. All studies have limitation. You should argue that this limitation do not impact the findings, and even if they do, you have taken steps to minimize the impact. And also, when you state the limitation, you make it clear for addressing issues that you did not promise to your study. So for example, if you are asked why you did not include gender in your analysis, you do not have to defend or apologize because you had given your reason in the limitation section or in your scope and delimitation. Components of scope and delimitation, topic of the study. So ito rin yung mga guide question na pwede nyo sagutan para mabuo nyo o ma-formulate nyo yung scope and delimitation. Topic of the study, what are the variables to be included and excluded? Objectives or problems to be addressed? Why are you doing this study? Time frame, when are you going to conduct this study? So, pwedeng months, kung ilang months, or pwede rin naman November 2021 to March 2022. For example lang. Local of the study, where are you going to gather your data? Characteristic of the respondents, who will be your respondent? Or anong sampling method yung gagamitin nyo? So, pwedeng ganon, or ilang participant yung target nyo at sino-sino yun. So, general dapat yun na. Methods and research instrument, how are going to collect the data? Lastly, the definition of terms or 1.7 includes terms which should be interpreted in a manner unique to your research, includes all the important variables in the study. Definition of terms are also referred to as operational definition of terms. Is a brief section consisting of definition of key terms or concepts used in the study, or in your study. So for example, the term socio-economic status may have various meanings, so it is important to clarify to the reader the way you operationalize the term as used in your study. Unfamiliar or technical words may also require an exact definition. So the following are some guidelines. Write a brief introductory statement. It shortly describes the content of the definition of terms. List or write the words or terms which are technical that would be included. Make sure that the variables and key terms found in the title are included. The term should be arranged alphabetically. Indentation should be applied to each system. The term should be followed with a period. It can be underlined or not. It can be bold and italic or not. Pero para pare-pareho kayong lahat, each term should be in italic followed by a short description. Then yung description not in italic. Treat each definition as if you were quoting from a dictionary. Kahit operational definition yung ilalagay niyo. Next, it does not have to be lengthy, direct to the point. Acronym or initial should be defined clearly. Complete name should be written first, followed by the acronym or initial in open-close parentheses, then the definition or meaning. Do not overflow with technical terms, only those relevant and significant to the study. Keep the definition brief and basic. You will elaborate on it more in the body of your paper. And remember, minimum of 7 terms and maximum of 15 terms.